Hey guys, it's me, Terradin. I thought I would just run through some things that I've learned about Battle Brothers to help you get started if you're a new player. So, if you're new to Battle Brothers, there are some tutorial videos you can look at, but if you watch this video, it should get your basics covered at least. So, we're going to click on New Campaign. So the name you put in here will be the name that your company is referred to. It defaults to Battle Brothers, but you can put whatever you want in here. The difficulty, if it's your first time playing, I strongly recommend you play on beginner because it'll let you see more of the game and then you can learn at least a little bit of a lot of things on your first playthrough. So then if you want to take on the more challenging difficulties, at least you've had a more full view of the different things that are in the game. If you're someone who would rather reveal the game as you've earned it through a harder difficulty, then maybe you could start on veteran. And if you really don't mind losing within like the first hour of play on your first try, then you can choose expert. But personally, I would recommend beginner because it'll let you see more of the game. And Iron Man is kind of more like a personal choice. If you want to be able to reload your mistakes, then leave this unchecked. If you want your actions to be permanent, then you can check Iron Man. I usually like playing with Iron Man on. You just need to be careful. Like, you don't want to run into orcs too early because they will wipe you in most cases. And then the late game crisis, this won't come into effect until like day 90 or sometimes even like 100. So it's not super relevant if you're new, but if you're worried about getting wrecked by a crisis, they added this option where you can say you don't want any crisis at all, and then you can just enjoy the sandbox of your mercenary company. I have heard that the Noble War is one of the easier crises. It will resolve itself even if you don't get involved, I believe. So if you still want to have an endgame crisis, but you'd rather err on the side of an easier kind of crisis, then you can choose the war. And I've heard that the Greenskin invasion is the most affecting crisis. Like, even if you are strong enough to repel it without taking much losses to yourself, you still might lose some towns and villages on the map permanently due to the Greenskins raiding them. The banner option over here just visually changes what banner your company has. I don't think it has any gameplay effects. So now let's dive into the game and I can show you some stuff. I'm gonna gloss over the story because you should probably enjoy that yourself. So I'm just gonna click through it rapidly so I can explain a few more things. So at the beginning, you'll see some of your guys get killed. This is part of the game. This is not something that you can avoid, I believe. It's possible maybe if you ran this enough times, if they had made it possible. Oh. I don't think you can kill Hoggart here either, but I've never really tried shooting at him, so I'm just gonna try it this time and see what happens. They probably would rig it so you miss, maybe? I don't know. This guy is supposed to get away. Basically, it's part of the story. In the first battle, basically all you want to do is move your guys close to the enemies and then do any attacks that you can do. It's pretty hard to lose the first encounter. I was a little crazy and I put my crossbow guy too far out. You usually want to keep your ranged guys out of melee range of any enemies. And one thing I'll explain here is if you're in melee with someone who has a melee weapon, like if you're right beside them, then if you try to move away, they get a free attack on you. So in a lot of cases, it's not a good idea to try to move out of melee. And I'll try it here just so you can see. So he got a free attack and he happened to miss this time, which is very lucky. But especially if you play on harder difficulties, they're less likely to miss. Another thing you'll notice is, okay, so there's different bars here. The first bar is for your helmet durability. So you can see he just took a hit to his head, which took all the durability off of his helmet. And then there's also an armor durability for the body, and that's at full for this character. And then the heart bar, that's the health. So he's only at 2 health. So if he were to take 2 more damage to his health, then he would go down. And just because your guy loses all his health doesn't mean that he dies. Sometimes they just go down, and then at the end of the battle, they're alive. But usually if this happens, they'll take a permanent injury, which is something that could potentially end their career. Like, it could be a very powerful debuff that is permanent, and it makes them totally ineffective. Another thing I'll explain here is there's 2 different range weapons. There's crossbows and bows. Crossbows need to be reloaded, and they also have a shorter range, but bows have range hit chance penalties if you try to shoot them from further away. So you'll see I spent 2 AP to shoot a bolt, and he has 7 AP left. This other action, reload, costs 7, so it takes your entire turn to use a crossbow, and you get quite fatigued reloading it every turn. And so this 2-handed axe guy, I just chose to do a normal attack because I was feeling very confident. Normally, if you're fighting a shield guy and you have an axe, there's this ability shields have called Split Shield, where if you use it, it inflicts a lot of damage to their shield. So if I do Split Shield instead, he would no longer have a shield and he wouldn't be able to block anymore, which probably would have been way smarter. I think this is rigged because this guy probably should have went down. So yes, the tutorial battle is impossible to lose your guys on. And then at the end of the battle, you find loot. Make sure you click this button to loot all items. I've seen Let's Plays where people just leave, and they assume that since it says found loot, that this is loot that they now have. But you don't have it until you click loot all items. So after that first battle, you gain control of your company. I'll just quickly... So they give you these 3 guys to kind of show you some different archetypes. Oh yeah, another thing I should explain. So this top row here that your guys start in, this is actually the front line of your battle line. So if you have archers, you can put them in this second row. The second row means they're in the back line. So when you go into a battle, your guys will actually line up so that these 2 guys are in the front and this one's in the back. These 10s at the bottom is reserve. So when guys are in reserve, they don't fight. You can only have 12 guys that are not in reserve, and then any additional guys you have will go into reserve automatically, and you can switch them from reserve to be in the battle line. So now I'll just explain some different archetypes. So generally speaking, your frontline guys are either shield guys or 2-handed guys. You can also do a one-handed without a shield build because there's this trait, double grip, which gives them a bit of extra damage when they don't have a shield. And there's some traits where you can make someone who only has 1 weapon with the offhand free even better, like duelist, and you can make them like nimble and stuff. That's a more advanced build that for a beginner I wouldn't really worry about. But if you're interested in it, it's definitely something you can pursue. So generally speaking, you have shield guys, which are harder to kill because shields are actually quite good at keeping guys alive. And then you have 2-handed guys who deal a lot of more damage when they attack. Like you can see this axe does 35 to 70, and this spear only does 25 to 30. So this axe will always hit for more damage when it hits, based on those damage ranges. And also, another thing you'll notice is there's in the attributes of weapons, there's the percentage of damage that ignores armor, and then there's the percentage of effectiveness against armor. So effectiveness against armor, if it's over 100, then anything over 100 is a bonus. So if something's 100% effective, it means it does its normal damage. Since this is 125% effective, it does its normal damage plus 25% to armor. And 40% of its damage ignores armor, so 40% of the damage it would normally deal goes straight to their health. And then the remaining 60% of the damage you would deal would be 125% effective. So it's kind of like you're doing 40% of this damage range to their health and 75% to their armor, because 60 with an extra 25% is 75%. Hopefully that math is right. I'm not convinced it is, but it should be pretty close. And then you'll notice this spear is a lot less effective in terms of percentages. Less damage goes through to the health, and when it hits armor, it actually loses 10% effectiveness. So you can see the value of two-handers over one-handed weapons in terms of dealing out damage. But without a shield, you're very vulnerable, because mainly what the shield does is it increases your melee and range defense, so this shield adds 15 to both, which is quite a lot, because you'll see this guy only has 5 and 4. But this guy has 22, 24, which is more than 4 times as much. And then for back row guys, you can have crossbow guys. There's also bows. And then there's also pole arms. Pole arms can only attack from 2 spaces away, but that means if your guy's in the back row, he can attack over a guy in the front row. So we'll get some more guys and I'll outfit them, and you can kind of see how that goes. So early on, you'll have a quest that you need to go to a specific town that's nearby. And this is like your first quest to kind of teach you what quests are about. Again, I'm going to skip through the text because you should enjoy it for yourself. You do get an option of whether or not you want to go after Hoggart. I would always choose to do it because the tutorial missions are quite easy and you get resources from them. So I think it is well worth doing them. So once you reach a town, there's a few different things you can click on and you can kind of explore them, but the most important ones that you need to know about are the marketplace, because the marketplace is where you can buy different assorted gear and supplies you're going to need. And then there's this gathering of guys at the bottom where you can hire new men. So if you go to the well, actually, usually at the start of the game you should hire some guys first, because then you can kind of get a sense of what equipment you need. At the beginning, anyone who costs like in the 300-ish range and below, I would just hire them, because you only start with 3 men and you can field 12 at most. And you'll want to field as many as you can up to that 12, because numbers is just a pure advantage. Like maybe if you had someone truly awful and they weren't geared out at all, it would make sense to not field them, because you don't want them to just die pointlessly. But if you can put any kind of gear that makes them useful into their hands, I would say it's worth fielding them. So, and another thing you should look at is different units, different guys you can hire. They have different backgrounds, like this one's a gravedigger and this one's a monk. The backgrounds actually do matter for their base stats and their growths. So if you hire someone that's sounds like they have a background that's more geared towards combat, or at least like hard physical labor, they tend to be stronger. That said, I had a beggar once who was like my best archer, so there is randomness involved. Like sometimes you can find someone with an unlikely background who's really good, but generally speaking, the more hardy their background sounds. Like if you find someone who's a retired soldier, obviously they've seen real combat, so they tend to be better at combat. Early on, you won't be able to afford people like that, because the other thing is if they have backgrounds that are more likely to be good at combat, they tend to cost more. So we're just gonna hire all these guys. Like monks are not really good at combat, but they do have some good resolve, so they can be good leaders for your troops. And beggars, that tends to be a not very good background. But fishermen, they do labor, so they can be okay from my experience. So you'll see when you're evaluating a guy, some things you want to look at. If you're looking at a frontline guy, then melee skill is important, melee defense is also important, and fatigue is important. So fatigue is your capacity to hold like heavy equipment. So if you want to deck someone out in the heaviest, most badass armor, they're going to need a lot of fatigue. So for a new guy, over 100 fatigue is good. I would say if it's less than 100, you can still work with them, but it's just not as good as it could be. For melee skill, over 50 for a starting guy, I would say is good. Anything less than 50, potentially it will be passable for the beginning. Like at the beginning, you kind of just need whatever guys you can get. But for the long term, if it's not over 50, then you're probably going to be able to find better guys. And for melee defense, like hopefully it would be decent, like 5 or 6. 3, I mean, is not the worst. And then another thing you'll notice is there's these little stars. So the stars mean that they're talented. Characters will have stars in 3 of their stats. They can have between 1 and 3 stars on the stats. So 3 stars is very talented and 1 star is slightly talented. Generally speaking, if you have a guy with decent stats, like the stars will help out a lot. But if their stats are bad, the stars won't usually make up the difference, unless it's like they're only slightly below and they have 3 stars, then that might make up the difference. A lot of people get focused on the stars and they think that they're the most important aspect, but actually you can more or less ignore the stars at the start. Later on, if you can find guys with good stats that also have stars that match in areas you want to work them in, then obviously that is better than not having the stars. Another thing you want to look at is these circles here are different attributes of the character. So this is a monk that we hired, and this is his morale. He's in good spirit. This other one is a trait. So this monk, he is brave, so he gets +5 to resolve. So this is a positive trait. Another character archetype. So I explained 2 different kinds of frontline archetypes, and I explained 3 different kinds of backline archetypes. Another backline archetype, which is a polearm user, so it kind of falls into one of the 3 I already explained, is a sergeant. A sergeant is a character that has high resolve, and his job is to keep the morale of your troops up so that they don't break. So having high resolve lets you pass some of your resolve onto the rest of your party if you are holding a banner, and it also lets you use a perk that you can unlock called Rally the Troops. It raises the morale of all nearby allies. The higher the resolve of the character using this skill, the higher the chance to succeed. So a good starting resolve for a new character is over 50, so this monk has good resolve. So in theory, he could be our sergeant, or at least he's probably our best candidate so far, having not even looked at our other candidates. Just based on my knowledge, I would say over 50, he's likely to be our best candidate. So now we can look at this Gravedigger. He has 2 stars in fatigue, and he has 2 stars in melee defense. And he also has over 50 melee skill. So this is a guy where even though his fatigue is less than 100, and his melee defense is not as high as it could be like a 5 or a 6, I think, for a starting character, and that would be better. But because he is 2-star talented in both of those, I feel like he'll probably make that up, because he's only slightly below, and his melee skill is over 50. In fact, it's 55. So this guy is going to be a good hire who will probably work out in the long run. So your guys who are good early on, that are going to be with you for a while, you want to make sure that at the start of the game, if they're in the front line, they have a shield, because the shield is going to keep them alive more so than if they didn't have a shield. Also, this is more just a personal choice for myself. I like to put the two-handed guys on the ends. You may find more success putting them in the middle. It's really just a personal choice. I'm not sure which one is better. I just like that they can close in. So if they're on the end, they can close in towards the middle if they need to, but they can also be on the outside. Whereas if they're in the middle, well, I guess they could go either way, but I usually try to have at least a couple, so they come in from different angles and cover both sides. Kind of. I don't know. That probably doesn't make sense. There's probably people out there who have better strategies for positioning their guys. Okay, so now let's look at our beggar. So our beggar also has over 50 in melee skill, but his fatigue is 81, so his fatigue is kind of lowish. But he's passable. Like, over 50 melee skill, honestly, is the big thing that you want early on. Actually, yeah, I realized I didn't check to see what traits he had, but he doesn't have any positive or negative traits. This guy has the trait Gluttonous, so he eats extra food. So food is a resource you have to manage with your mercenary company. So that's not nearly the worst of the negative traits. That's pretty workable. Okay, so this guy, his melee skill is less than 50. His range skill is less than 50. It's even less than 40. Even though he has a star in it, he's not going to be able to make up the difference enough to be a very good archer. He could be an okay archer. He's got 3 stars in range defense. So generally in the back row, you want to give your guys some range defense, because when you're in the back, you're not likely to enter into melee, but you will have ranged attacks launched at you. So potentially he could be a back row guy. And you'll notice his resolve's 38, this guy's resolve's 32, this other guy's resolve's 41, this one's 41, 38. This guy actually has 53, but he has really good melee skill. For a level 1 character to have 59 melee skill, plus he has 2 stars, there's no way we would make him our sergeant, because we need him in the front doing his job. He's also got 5 melee defense, and he's got some positive traits. He's fearless, and he's Spartan. So, as I said, this 53 for this monk, he is definitely our best candidate. So, these guys don't have weapons. One other thing you want to realize is when you hire new guys at the start of the game, they're not likely to have very much gear. So you want to make sure that you give them weapons. Ideally, you'd go to the market. Another tip I'll give you is early on, spears and swords have bonuses to hit chance, and at the beginning your guys are not very experienced, so their ability to hit is not very good. So I'm gonna want to buy a pitchfork for our potential sergeant, because he's gonna use pole arms, and this lets him attack from the back row without needing to rely on his range skill, which is really bad. And actually his melee skill is quite bad too, but it's better to get him swinging and at least trying to hit things than not. So the next thing is you'll have another quest to move to another town. So we'll just move over here, and I'll just speak a bit more on gearing out your guys and hiring guys, because there's going to be even more opportunities in this city. Okay, so in this city, you'll have a lot more guys, and you'll also have some very experienced guys that are expensive. So if you look at this guy, he's a sellsword, and he costs almost 4,000. I would say it's a really bad idea to spend all of your money on one guy early on, because it's possible it could work out for you, but if you're a new player, it's probably better to not go down that road, because it's putting all your eggs in one basket, and if an archer gets one lucky shot on your guy, he could just be dead forever. So again, like I was saying before, 300-ish and below is kind of the range you want to look at early on. So this guy, he's a brawler, which means he's someone who gets into fights. So this is a fighter. right? So if you're thinking of backgrounds, I would hire this guy. And then this guy here, he's a peddler, so he sells goods. He's not a fighter. So he could have some latent talents that he has not discovered for himself that make him good at fighting, but chances are he's less likely to be a good fighter. And these fishermen, they do labor, so, and they also come with some gear, which is part of the reason that they're more expensive. So I'll hire a few more guys and we can take a look. So this brawler, he has over 50 melee skill. He also has 5 melee defense. And he has over 100 fatigue. So this is a good frontline guy. But unfortunately, he's superstitious, so he has -10 resolve at morale checks. So that is a bad trait. Overall, this is a decent guy to start with, although you could probably end up replacing him. So we would want to give him some gear if possible. Let's look at some other guys. So this fisherman has over 50 melee skill. He has 4 melee defense, and he's talented in melee defense, so this is another good front row guy. This fisherman has over 50 melee skill. In fact, he has 57. That's quite good. And he has almost 100 fatigue, and he has 2 stars in fatigue, so that's good. His defenses are not very high, so this is a guy we would want to keep a shield on, so he will stay alive, probably. He's hesitant, so he loses some initiative, but he's tough, so he has 10 extra free hit points. So this is a good frontline character. I forgot to look at this guy's traits. So he's athletic, that's a good trait, because you don't gain as much fatigue from moving. He's insecure, he'll never be confident morale. That's kind of negative, but it's not something you can't work around. Okay, so this peddler that I said, he's not a physical person. He sells goods. He's not a fighter. If you look at his stats, his melee skill is, not only is it below 50, it's below 40. Sure, he has 2 stars. Do not be blinded by the stars. The stars, if you're lucky, will just barely make up that difference of his bad starting stats. But he has really good defenses, actually. As we were talking about earlier, I was looking at some guys that had 5 and 3 melee defense. This guy has 10. And he also has 8 range defense, and he's talented in range defense. So he has some talents. Maybe if you baby him and you roll really well, he could end up being a decent frontline guy, just based on these defenses, and that he has stars that will help to make up for his bad stats, but he will not be good early on, at all. And he's also craven. So there are a few bad traits. One is craven, and another is, I think it's disloyal, where it says they're always content with being in reserve. Even though they're negative traits, they have downsides. I actually really like this aspect of them always being content with being in reserve, because they can be your backup guys. Like, I wouldn't put him in reserve right now because I don't have enough guys that I'm not fielding some of my guys. But if you hired a better guy later on, you could just leave him in reserve, and if you don't mind paying his daily fee, which is not actually that high, he's kind of like an emergency backup guy, where if you get caught away from towns exploring and you have to do multiple battles in a row and you want to replace someone who's wounded, he can just sit in, and he doesn't mind being in reserve. Because another mechanic in this game is, if you leave a guy in reserve when he could be fighting, he starts to lose morale because he feels useless in reserve. He'd rather be on the field of battle. So even though this is negative, it also has an upside to it, I feel. I like that aspect. So hopefully that gives you some insights into how to manage your band early on. So as I was saying before, spears and swords have bonuses to hit early on, and you're going to want to buy shields. Don't worry about if the shield's not repaired. You can use your tools to repair it automatically. And then you can also buy some decent armor. I usually like to splurge and buy a padded leather early on, because it's something you're going to use in your company for a decent amount of the campaign. Even though it spends quite a bit of your early money, it's going to be useful throughout the whole game. And then another tip I'll say is, if you have two-handed guys that are valuable, obviously they're not going to be using shields. I like to give him the best armor because it will help to keep him alive. So I would give him these 2 armor pieces that I just bought. And then anyone else who's decent that's not well equipped in terms of armor, I would give them some armor as well. So this guy is quite good. I would make sure to give him a shield. And so I'll show you here. So the spear, the basic attack for the spear has plus 20% chance to hit. So spears are very good early when your guys are not as trained, because it gives you that bonus chance to hit so that you can actually hit things. So you're going to want to make sure any guy that you're fielding has a weapon. Right now, I have 2 guys that don't have weapons, so I need to go back into the marketplace and find some weapons that I can give them. Here, there is not a lot, but I can buy this hatchet. And I don't want to give it to this guy with only 38, because hatchets don't have bonus chance to hit. Instead, I'll give it to this guy with 52. Although, early on, you don't need to worry too much. You kind of just need to work with what you've got. And I know from looking at the market earlier that if I go back to this town, this village, that there were some bludgeons, and bludgeons are cheap early weapons that you can use to outfit some of your extra guys. So this company, while obviously not amazing because it's the very start of the game, will give you a really good start. So hopefully I've given you the insights and the tips you need to be able to build a company like this for yourself right from the start. And this will give you the ability to succeed as long as luck is on your side and you don't do anything too careless. So hopefully you gain some helpful tips and insights from this. If you have any questions, you can comment below and I'll try my best to answer them. Aside from that, check out my Let's Plays on Battle Brothers. I'm doing one right now called The Loyal Sword Fellows, where I'm naming the characters after people, and if you want to join that company, you can comment on one of those videos and I'll potentially add you in. And you can also get a taste for how I handle some of the later challenges in the game. Aside from that, press the like button, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye!